Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, a weekly podcast by Lace Partners, a fundamentally different HR and payroll consultancy. Each week, we tackle some of the most interesting topics facing senior HR professionals. So whether that's from employee value proposition, performance management, people strategy, or even payroll, we cover it all. So join us for the next 30 minutes. And if you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on with the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, joining you on this Thursday that we release as always. And today I have a lovely pod. I have a fantastic pod, actually. What we tend to do is on this podcast, we do a little bit of pre-prep, believe it or not. We try to position it as it's just a chat, but we do like to have a little bit of pre-prep. And what it allows me to do is suss out the guests that we're getting on. So I've done a bit of pre-prep with a colleague of mine who's been on a few, Debbie Mitchell. Debbie sadly can't join us today, but she will be back on a future podcast. And I came off of the pre-prep chat with Debbie and I said, this guest is going to be a bit fabulous, I think. So there was about 5 different podcasts that we could do. So you may hear back, but we're going to start kicking off by a nice broad topic because Debbie and I thought this will be an interesting one. And it is the role of a CPO. What is a CPO, a CHRO, Chief Human Resources Officer or Chief People Officer? So we're going to kick that around a little bit. And to do that, I've got Kathryn Kendall from Saltus. How are you doing, Kathryn? You all right?
I'm very well, thank you, Chris. How are you?
Now, Kathryn, before we get into this detailed or broad, should I say, topic of, it feels a bit existential, doesn't it? What is a CPO? Before we get into that, we have a tradition on this podcast. It is called the Fundamentally Different Question. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. But in fact, let's do the introductions first, and then we'll go into our fundamentally different question. If you're listening in for the first time, fundamentally different question is completely random and not related to HR. It's just a little bit of an opening chit chat that we like to have. But before we do that, Kathryn, can you tell the lovely listeners of this podcast a little bit about yourself and also Saltus as well?
Of course. Thank you very much, Chris, for having me on today. And thank you, everybody who's listening, for listening. I am Kathryn, Chief People Officer at Saltus, wealth management organisation based around the UK. But I've spent more than 20 years in HR now, which makes me feel really old. Every time when I got my 20-year certificate through the CIPD, I was like, wow, I've been around a while now. But hopefully with time comes experience. So I've done a wide variety of HR roles across FMCG, technology, and now obviously working within financial services. But I come from a very non-typical HR background because I started my professional life as an actor. Yeah, all the way from drama school to the boardroom.
Do you feel like your professional career before HR has set you up for the work that you do now? So your acting career and stuff like that?
Like genuinely, yes. People ask me this quite a lot. And I certainly wouldn't have said however long ago I was at drama school, this is going to be really useful for a career in HR. But anybody who's been to drama school or has done a degree in a similar discipline knows it sets you up for so many things in life. And I think probably the biggest thing that it did for me was it's made me quite fearless because drama school is terrifying. Pretty much the entire 3 years you are terrified. But it's you go on this great learning journey and you come out at the end and you do believe, wow, I can go and achieve anything. So I think it's been fundamental to. I've had a lot of luck in my career, but I also think that training has stood me in really good stead.
Yeah, I really like that as well. And particularly when you think about what the very nature and the function of HR, some of the challenges it has to deal with, you need to be able to act in a certain way. You need to be able to behave in a certain way. You need to be able to remain composed in a certain way. We're going to get into that, but I need to do this fundamentally different question. You ready?
I'm ready.
So I've just read an article. It is around a humanoid AI robot has decided to paint, well, it hasn't been decided, somebody's clearly told it, to paint a picture of King Charles. And it came out with this quite interesting, multicoloured, slightly different, shall we say, portrait of a king compared to previous portraits of monarchy that we've had over hundreds and hundreds of years. So my question to you is, if you could have one thing, now it could be a friend, a family, a pet, it could be the DeLorean from Back to the Future. If you could have one thing painted by a humanoid robot so you can hang it on your wall, what would it be?
I feel I'm going to take this answer in a slightly oblique direction, Chris, but I think that's in the spirit of the question. The one thing I would love an AI robot to paint for me is my walls. So specifically my spare room walls. So there's a story behind this, which was we moved into the house 10 years ago and things just get worn out and things. And eventually the walls needed painting. And against my better judgment, my husband and I decided it'd be a great idea to get our 17-year-old son to paint the walls of the spare room because he wants to do something practical and he's lazing around the house and not doing much. So we're like, he's going to paint the walls. My cats would have done a better job of painting the walls. I can't describe to you how badly this bedroom has been painted. And I can't criticize him because he's worked hard and he's really tried his best. But then he's occasionally said to me, I think I'd quite like a job working as a builder. And I think, please don't go down the painting decorating route. Or if you're going to go down that route, some training may be required. So that is what I would like an AI robot to do, is come and literally paint my walls.
I would love it if this robot took that so literal and what you get painted on your walls is a picture of your walls.
On my badly painted walls. Yeah. So it's like one of those magic eye pictures where you just see it again and again. Yeah, that would be my worst nightmare. So it needs to come in and do that. I'd be very grateful. Bring on the AI robots.
Yeah, I am a cat man, and so I do love my cat. I would probably get it to paint a picture of Iago, but we've already got a random one where he's dressed up as a 17th century baron. So a picture of that.
Of course you have, Chris. Of course you've got that in your house. Don't we all have pictures of our cats dressed up as barons? That's amazing. That's amazing.
So I'd probably say to it, I need a version of that, maybe from dystopian future Iago, who's a captain of Terminator style, a captain of a legion of people. I'm going down such a rabbit hole.
That is niche. That is niche. That is niche. I'm here for the cat portraits. Absolutely here for it.
And the reason why we've got you here is to talk about this idea of chief people officer. So I'm going to kick it off with a nice, simple one. What's your kind of perspective as to what a chief people officer is, what the primary objective, and perhaps draw on your own, or obviously draw on your own experience, but having spoken to probably lots of other CPOs as you do, what do you think the perception is? So I guess two questions in that. What's your view on what's the fundamental critical role of a CPO? And then what do you think your collection of peers think as to that primary role? Is it the same thing?
I definitely think it's probably one of the only job titles out there where you genuinely get a laugh every time someone says, what do you do? And you're like, a chief people officer. I either get a look of bemusement or I get a CPO, is that the guy from Star Wars? Or people just laugh. I think there is something about HR. We love to rebrand ourselves, don't we? We love a bit of navel gazing, going, we've been personnel for a bit now. What should we be? We'll be HR now. Okay, cool. Been HR for a bit. Oh no, we don't like human resources. We're going to be people now. I hear rumors we're going to be chief happiness officers next, which is even more embarrassing than chief people officer. But I think if you cut through all the branding and the rebranding and everything around that, what is a CPO at its heart? We should be the person within that organization who has ultimate accountability and responsibility for the people within that business. And when I say responsibility, it's creating environments and ways of working for those people to be able to give of and perform at their best, which in turn enables the organization to perform at its best. So whenever people challenge me with that age-old question, or whose side is HR on, there are no sides. We are all here because we want the same outcomes. I want happy people who feel happy because they're doing their best work, and that best work is delivering for the company and delivering for our clients, and what a fantastic outcome for everybody. So I think very top level, that's the CPO's responsibility. I think in terms of how organizations view CPOs, there's definitely something about the title which immediately makes people think, oh, that's an ivory tower job. That's somebody sitting in an ivory tower running reams of data to produce a load of spreadsheets that are going to drive into strategy that's going to make this business a load more profitable. And don't get me wrong, there definitely is, and I'm sure we'll come on to, a huge component which is all about data and how that drives strategy and how that improves productivity outcomes. But I think that any CPO who's sitting in an ivory tower for all or the majority of their time is getting something fundamentally wrong. Because to me, one of the big shifts that I think we did make as a profession, consciously or subconsciously, when we moved from branding ourselves as human resources into people, you need to be understanding your organization, you need to be understanding your people, and you need to really be sitting at the heart of the business. And that's how I think I've always seen my role as I've progressed up through the ranks, is this greater and greater responsibility to sit right at the heart of that organization and really understand it, nuts and bolts from the inside out. I think that's how you best deliver.
Can I ask about the role of a CPO, CHRO, whatever it is, depending on the type of business and size of business as well? Because I'd imagine does it fundamentally change? Or perhaps a better way of wording this is, are there any similar traits, any threads that roll through? It doesn't matter if you're a CPO of a 100-person organization, like Lace Partners are, or a 10,000-person organization. Are there any kind of traits that you think are essential or are displayed regularly and consistently across different business sizes?
Funnily enough, I think it's less about the size of organisation, although there are some differences. We'll talk about those in a moment. And I think it's more about the culture of your organisation. And I try not to use management jargon, but I'm about to use it now. So apologies to those who, like me, hate it. But that people first approach. Some organisations have made an active choice to go, culture and people really matter to us. And to be really clear, this is not about the CPO or the people team saying these things are important, because clearly we're going to come and say these things are important. This is about an organization recognizing that, hey, wow, there really is something in this phrase of people being an organization's most valuable resource. Hey, this is really important. Or at the other end of the scale, you've got those organizations, and typically they are larger, but not always. There are some fantastic, very big, real people first organizations, but typically the larger scale, where it is more corporate, it is more hierarchical. There's less space and there's less listening in the boardroom to some of that would be described as softer stuff. I don't think softer stuff at all. I think it's often the harder stuff, like that cultural piece, that employee experience piece. And so I think those organizations want a very different CPO. And I've always been really open in my CPO roles. I am a particular type of CPO, and hopefully the organizations that I'm working in, I'm a good CPO, I would hope so. But I know full well that there are other organizations which I wouldn't want to work for, and they wouldn't want me to work for them, because I would not be delivering what they're looking for. There is a piece on the size piece, because I think as you scale teams, so for example, today I've got a team of 5. So I am naturally business of 400. I'm naturally going to be very hands-on. That's why I like working in this size of business. That's the sweet spot for me. If I was working in a 10,000 person business, I'd have a team exponentially larger. I'd have a load of specialists. I think then as a CPO, and I'm hypothesizing here because I haven't worked in that size of business, I think it must be even more difficult to remain truly connected with your organization. And I imagine you have to really think again in terms of actually, how do I ensure that I really understand what it's like working there on the front line, customer facing, in our technical teams? How do I make sure that I'm not like 7, 8 stages removed from that? So different challenges, different sizes of business, but I do think you've got probably a spectrum of where CPO roles would sit, those who fall at either end and everybody who's in between.
Yeah, and you talked a minute ago there about that culture and that people first side and the key role and driver that you as a CPO or your HR function has. I don't want to ask this question, which gives an inevitable answer, who owns culture, because culture is actually it runs throughout an organization. It's not the sole president of one function or one individual. So I'll flip that slightly. What do you see the CPO's role in weaving and embedding a certain type of culture within a business? And how much do you think that changed, given exactly what you just said about sizes of business as well? So if you've got 10,000 person business, you've got 100 different offices or warehouses or whatever it is, like how much impact can a centralized HR function have? What is HR's role in both of these scenarios, both from you personally or your perspective for when you've got that larger organization?
It's a really pertinent topic for us at Saltus at the moment, Chris, because we're growing really rapidly. So I joined the business at the end of 2022. We had about 180 people then. We're now midway through 25 and we've got over 400. So in terms of rate of growth, that's pretty huge. And we're grappling with what I think all fast growth organizations grapple with to a degree, which is how do you keep that great culture that's everybody's loved? And actually, it's not possible to keep that great culture. I think we talk about retaining cultures. The culture when you're 1,000 people will not be the same as when you're 100 people. It just won't. That is not possible. It's like when you have a family gathering and there's 4 of you, and then you go to a bigger family gathering and there's 100 of you. Both still lovely, but both very different experiences. So I think I've always seen my role as CPO, and indeed this is something that I'm working on at the moment within Saltus, not in terms of being the gatekeeper of the culture, because you're right, no one person can do that, but about saying what are the fundamental tenets of our culture that as we grow and as we scale, some things are going to be different. We can't all get together in the office for a party anymore because 400 people don't fit in one room. But what are those tenets that we must keep, firstly? And then secondly, what are those red lines that even when we get to 50,000 people, we are never going to be disrespectful to one another. We are never going to forget to put the client first. We are never going to stop communicating with one another and setting clear expectations, whatever those might be. And I think, therefore, the role of CPO is to be the conscience of the organization, in so much as when you're sat in those boardroom discussions, and we'll talk about the role that you need to bring to those in terms of bringing that data and driving those decision making, but you need to be the person in there who's also saying, but hang on a minute, guys, let's just think about this. How does this fit within this framework that we've said is really key to attract people, retain people, and best serve our clients? We're saying that this is the culture we need. Let's just sense check. Let's look at how that stays within that framework. So it's not about being the gatekeeper, but it is about saying, what does the framework look like? And it is about being the person with sort of one hand on the rudder to make sure that we are actually steering within the framework that we've all agreed and said this is important to us.
I really like that analogy of being that steerer, being that sort of the cox, if you like, that's directing the rainbow along. Really interesting. So we wrote a white paper years ago talking about for HR to be less tactical and a little bit more strategic in its thinking. It needs to actually almost be an internal consultant to the business on things like culture. And so I quite like the analogy or what you were describing there, because it's almost step away from that tactical side, step away from the traditional kind of the tactical HR just dealing with the current problems or grievances, whatever it is at the moment, and starting to look at things like culture and be able to be that steerer. I really like that analogy. But you also talked just then about conversations or the relationship. And I guess this, as part of that role, as that person that is steering the culture side at the C-suite and in your leadership team, or CPOs, CHROs, everywhere across their leadership team. So can we talk a little bit about that? And you talked about data as well. So can I get some thoughts from you around the relationships that you have in the C-suite? What are the most important relationships for you? And then let's also touch on the increasing prevalence of data and how you guys are using, or how you've seen peers, C-suite and CPO level, leveraging people data to tell your story a little bit more.
Definitely. So I think when it comes to relationships, look, as CPO, you are there to be the conduit between every team within the organization. So you have to go and build incredibly strong relationships right across the business. But I think the error that, and it's the same for everybody I know is working in HR, unless you consciously carve out time to go, what's the roadmap? Where do we need to get to? You can sometimes feel like you're treading water every single day. So this links back to your comment, Chris, in terms of the boardroom and what should CPOs and CHROs be bringing to the boardroom. And I think lots of senior HR people, and I've definitely made this mistake in my career, go to one end of that extreme or the other. So either they only come in with the, we should do this, why? Because it's really nice for our people and it makes them want to stay here and stuff, without any of the data to back it up. And then data is the language of the boardroom, right? You've got to speak the language of the boardroom. So if you haven't got the data, it's going to be really painful. Or, and I see this increasingly, because as HR professionals, we know we need to be all things to all people. So we've got all this data. We've got to bring this data. We've got to surface this data. And we're going too far the other way. So we're coming in with just data. And back to my point on culture, we are forgetting to steer the culture ship along the way. We're so caught up by this data, we're forgetting the bigger picture in terms of we can do all those things. But ultimately, if we can't attract and retain people and enable them to do their best work, we're not going to be achieving on the objectives that the organization has set for us. So I think it's walking that very fine balance. And it's really hard to get right. I definitely don't get it right all the time. Lots of the time, it's very difficult. We sit on more data than practically any other area in the business. AI, and we won't go down an AI route, not least because I have very little knowledge of that area, but AI, there's no excuses not to surface that data anymore. For a long time, HR systems have been rubbish. Maybe HR people haven't come in with traditional data skills or whatever it might be. The excuses are gone. So we've got to surface that data, but we can't go too far the other way and forget the heart and the soul of the organization. And that's the tightrope I think we have to walk.
Yeah. It's really difficult to balance there. You're talking between being people-centric and data-driven and matching the two to be able to tell a story that isn't over-egging the pudding on one side or the other, because then you just lose your audience if you're talking to a C-suite level. One of the things I've just written down, actually, just as you were talking, is you've obviously talked about how much data HR teams have, people teams have. What's your kind of personal drivers around measuring what successful is, balancing what do we measure, and why do we measure it? Or how do you see success being measured within either your business, or you can even answer that from a HR-wide perspective if you want to go meta?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, again, there's not a one size fits all. I think it does depend on the business. So for myself, we have a monthly board dashboard, and I have probably about 10 metrics within that, which I have said, these are our key KPIs, so our K KPIs, which really say, from an organizational health perspective on the people side, how are we doing? And those metrics are a real blend between those that are very dry, so like things like our attrition levels, our cost of staff as a percentage of our gross revenue, that kind of thing, all the way through to those hearts and minds pieces. So, for example, we would look into voluntary attrition, we'd look into employee net promoter score. So actually, how are people rating how we're doing? And I think you have to layer those. So I think you then take all of that data and you start to look not just at what it's saying to you in isolation, but what are your trends? Because we, again, and this is moving from being reactive to being more forward thinking. I think if I look back 10 years ago, all I would have done as an HR leader would have said, this is what the data tells you right now. Cool, lovely, that's great, Kathryn. But what does it tell us compared to how we were doing 12 months ago? And even more importantly, what's that same data going to be saying to us in 12 months' time? So actually, we have this opportunity. We should see the warning signs in HR before almost anywhere else in the business if we surface that data correctly. So I would say the way you go about it is, what are those key metrics for your business? Some of those might overlap with mine. Some will be totally different depending on what you do. How do you measure those? How do you ensure that data is accurate? How do you surface that? And then how do you monitor not just the trends, but what's to come? And that's when you can go in and really start those board conversations. And suddenly you've got a really interested audience.
That's the fascinating piece. It's being able to take lots and lots of data and distill it down into those key messages. That's one of the challenges. Do you know what? I get accused of this within Lace, and actually throughout my career, is sometimes opening the door too wide, giving too much information to people. And then the net effect of that is when you want to make a decision, you're giving me too much information here.
Yes.
One of your roles as a strategic leader, Chris, is to take all of this information and pull out the key bits, distill that down so that you can come to board and say, I've got 3 things that we've got to decide today, or 3 directions in which we've got to go. This is the information. If you need to, you pull certain data out from your back pocket, but actually you focus on those. I really like what you described there, those 10 key metrics. That's the real skill, isn't it, about telling that story?
Yeah, it is. And I think the only caveat I would give to that is the data can tell you 90% of a story, but it won't tell you everything. You know, we work in this slightly nebulous world of people and feelings and drivers and emotion and sentiment. So definitely use your data to drive those decisions, but don't let that data solely drive your decisions. And that's what I mean when we get back into this kind of like spectrum of where you sit between hearts and minds and data. Our role is to bring all of those things together. And then I think you get to the best outcomes.
I've got 2 more questions for you before we clock off for the day for this particular podcast. The first one is actually a Debbie question in her absence because I really liked it. And it's apologies, listeners, because normally we just wing it on the HR on the Offensive podcast. And I have a list of questions and I only ever actually get to ask about 3 of them because we go off in different directions. It's been a really good chat today. Debbie's question, tell us something about your role that your stakeholders frequently misunderstand or underestimate. I love that question.
I think it is the complexity of people. I think understanding people surprise me in this job every single day, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, but they surprise me every single day. And I think organizations, really, people would probably in many ways not be our chosen resource because people are unpredictable and they are not all the same and they all have nuances and they all need slightly different things. And I think, therefore, trying to make organizational wide decisions, which totally stack up in terms of logistics and efficiency and communication, the nuances of then getting those to land with individuals, I think stakeholders underestimate the time and the skill that it takes to get those to land. I think sometimes it's you just need to go and deliver this message. How hard can it be? And the answer is sometimes very hard, very hard. And I think what we should be doing if we're doing HR well is taking a lot of that pain away, both for the organization, but also for the individuals, getting to better outcomes for everybody. But that takes time. And there's nothing I've seen in terms of the world of AI so far that suggests to me that's going to be able to be sped up, because ultimately people will always be people. And that's what makes us all so brilliant and bafflingly unpredictable at the same time.
Yeah, and it's what makes every single business so different as well. No 2 businesses are alike, and it's because of that people side. And you can hear as many stories as you like in the press around businesses saying, what we're going to do is just chop out 500 heads or whatever it is because they're going to be replaced by AI bots. But there comes a tipping point, in my opinion, there becomes a tipping point in which you're effectively creating just organizational clones. And so therefore, how do you get differentiation? How do you get creativity? That has to be measured through the different people that you get within your business. And this kind of is my segue to my final question, which is, I guess, is more around the future role of the CPO. So a nice open free swim for you to have a little monologue about where do you see that future CPO looking if we're on this pod in, a couple of years, maybe 5 years time. The hot topics at the moment is, and in the press, as I've just mentioned, is you've got CEOs saying we're going to replace, like the CEO of Duolingo saying we're going to replace contractors with AI. And I think there's something that's just come out in the press from King, the gaming company who do that Candy Crush stuff. And they've said, look, we're restructuring and we're going to have a whole bunch of AI doing the role of creating certain levels within our games and stuff. So what's your kind of view? And you don't have to go down the AI route, just CPO as a role, how you see that evolving and changing over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time?
I think it will align with the changes that we're already starting to see to the world of work, which are in part, as you outlined, Chris. So I think, look, where are we going to go in terms of technology? Machines and AI will end up doing the things that machines and AI do better than people, but people will continue to be needed across the vast majority of organizations to do the things that no machine or no amount of AI can replicate. We are in the main going to continue to sell to people, and people like AI to automate things to an extent, but there all comes a point for all of us when we go, and now I want to speak to a real person. So organization shape and size will flex. Job roles will evolve massively. I look at my kids are in their teens, and I think you two are probably going to be doing jobs that I haven't even heard of today. Hopefully Jamie's not painting walls, or we've all got a real problem on our hands. They're going to be doing jobs that I haven't even heard of. So we're going to need to be, I think, very forward-looking and agile in terms of how we think about organization structure and design. But the other piece I would put alongside that is we are still going through this huge way of working evolution off the back of the pandemic. People have tried to claim that, it's finished now, everybody's going back to the office, organizations calling people back to the office, or people are working 100% remotely. Some organizations have made those decisions, sure, but what has changed, and I see this in almost everybody I speak to, but particularly those younger people coming into the workplace for the first time, if they are no longer prepared to be dictated to with this one-size-fits-all answer about this is the job and this is where you work and this is how you do it, they're suddenly going, actually, do you know what? My well-being is really important. My mental health is really important. My ability to have children or pets or look after my elderly parents, those things are really important. And actually, do you know what? They are more important to me than work, which is a very healthy and correct approach to have. At the same time, organizations need people to come in and do a certain task, to be worked in a certain way. And so I think we are going to see our role continue to evolve, looking at how we support businesses with suddenly a workforce that isn't going to just be compliant and say, yeah, sure, no problem, I'll be wherever and whenever you want me to be. I think we're going to see a far more portfolio approach to work. I think we're going to see far more people who perhaps do some consulting over here and do some part-time work for this organization over here. And I think as CPOs, we've got to be ready for that, and we've got to help our organizations to be ready for that. I think big changes are ahead of us.
Yeah, exciting changes with the way in which we work, and the fluidity in the way in which we work is constantly evolving. It's always constantly evolved through time, but it feels like the pace of that, particularly post-pandemic, has really increased rapidly. Kathryn, we are out of time, unfortunately, but I feel like I could have chatted with you for at least another half an hour, 2 hours, but we'll save a little bit of the good stuff for next time around when we do get Debbie on. But thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. It's been great.
It's been absolutely amazing. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast as much as I have enjoyed recording it. Please feel free to give us any comments, do the liking and all of that sort of stuff across whatever podcast platforms you listen to. But for today, thank you very much for listening. And from myself and Kathryn, we will catch you next time on HR on the Effective Podcast. Bye-bye.